Yeah, to my relatives, this is Mark Charles. It is Monday, August 16th, and I'm sitting down to drink my second cup of coffee. And I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the events going on this past weekend, but I really want to frame it in the dialogue of the hubris of the United States of America. And there's a lot of what's been happening over the past weekend has me reflecting on that, and especially how that hubris is exacerbated by our nation's lack of a common memory. So before I begin, let me do as I always do by acknowledging I'm speaking to you from what is now known as Washington, D.C., but these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the host people of these lands, thank them for their stewardship of it, and just state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. So, yeah, my Piscataway relatives. If you follow me on Twitter or have been watching my social media over the weekend, you'll notice I've tweeted about a few things. First of all, I did watch the sunrise. I think last Friday was the last time I could see it. Maybe it was Saturday morning. It's been pretty cloudy here recently, and we're expecting rain over the next week, so I won't be able to watch it a lot. But I was able to watch the sunrise one day over the weekend. And on the 14th, August 14th, it was National Navajo Code Talkers Day. And I tweeted something out yesterday on Sunday. And what I said in regards to that is, and it's something I've been reflecting on more and more as I've been trying to acknowledge our nation's history. But even just looking at what's going on currently, even as in both Canada and the U.S., we've begun to acknowledge a little bit more about, hold on, I'm going to put this into the comment. And so I tweeted out this. I said, August 14th is National Navajo Code Talkers Day. And over the course of my life, I've had the privilege of meeting several of the Navajo Code Talkers. I honor my Dene elders as well as all of the native code talkers because they're actually code talkers from, I think, as many as 30 different languages and tribes. I honor them both for their service and because many of them are also boarding school survivors. And this is something that we cannot overlook, right? We love as a nation to honor, well, I don't say we love it. We've recently begun to step into a practice of honoring the Navajo and other code talkers who literally helped our nation win the war in World War II. And they were indispensable in especially the Pacific theater, but they were highly effective at encoding and decoding messages quickly and securely, even in, even in real time. And so our nation has gotten better about honoring the code talkers. Many of our code talkers, because this was World War II, have been passing away or dying, and there are really only a few left, I believe. I've actually had the privilege, as I said in the tweet, of meeting some of the code talkers, even back in college. And when I was living on the reservation, my school, the school my son was going to Neb Olta, the Navajo Immersion School, I actually ran a Navajo Code Talkers Club where we began teaching the kids the code and allowing them to kind of practice with it and begin using it just as a way to encourage their Navajo learning and language skills. But as I researched more of the code talkers and got to know some of their stories, one of the things that you cannot omit is the fact that most of the code talkers were boarding school survivors. And so the purpose of the boarding schools was literally to beat the language out of the children. It was to kill the Indian to save the man, to forcibly assimilate native children from our traditional cultures and languages to becoming assimilated white Americans. They were punished for speaking their languages. They were punished for practicing their culture. And many of the Navajo code talkers came directly out of boarding school and enrolled in the military. And now the language that the government and the churches were literally attempting to beat out of them a few months or years prior was now being used to save this nation. And it's just becoming more and more apparent to me that we cannot fully honor the Navajo and other Native American code talkers who serve this country without acknowledging the incredible oppressive and even genocidal behavior, cultural genocidal behavior we had towards them by putting them into boarding schools and attempting to forcibly assimilate them to this Western American, European language and culture. And so I think we need to acknowledge that. We can't fully honor them for their service as code talkers without acknowledging the oppressive things our government and churches were doing to them to try and prevent them from doing the things they actually ended up asking them to do, which is to save this country by using our languages. So I was able to tweet about that and get some of that out over the weekend. And then, of course, we have the earthquake that happened in Haiti, which has killed hundreds of people and is once again a major crisis, not only because of the earthquake, but because of the incredible broken infrastructure and government in Haiti, which is absolutely due to our own colonialism there, where after the enslaved peoples in Haiti successfully won their freedom through a rebellion, won their freedom from the French. And then the United States and other of our NATO allies, wasn't NATO back then, but of our other Western European allies, literally punished that country through trade agreements and through embargoes, and gave them very little hope of ever succeeding as a nation, drowning them in debt and treating them as a sub-class of nation, which is what's led to the broken infrastructure and the crumbling government that exists in Haiti today, which is why they've been unable to respond well to these national tragedies like earthquakes and other things that happen. And so again, while the world is once again pouring out charity on Haiti, our modern day charity is not sufficient to fix the systemic injustice that we've been acting against these nations like Haiti for centuries. And so we have to own that. We have to own that. And then, of course, we have Afghanistan, right? And Afghanistan is been an absolute mess, as it has been literally crumbling before the eyes of the world, and crumbling in a way that was our government did not anticipate, and falling apart faster than was ever expected it would fall apart. For people who have been paying attention, and for people who understand culture and diversity and different groups of people, what's happening is not surprising. Our nation is kind of surprised. In fact, there was an article I wanted to share with you. It's an article I found in the Washington Post over the weekend. The article is titled, let me bring it up a minute here. Hold on just a second. Sorry. The article is titled From Hubris to Humiliation. America's warrior class contends with the abject failure of its Afghanistan project. And I want to share this article. I'll put it into the comments section of both Facebook and Twitter, or Facebook and YouTube, where I'm streaming this. But there's a quote in this article that I want to read because it is absolutely fascinating. And it's a quote by retired Lieutenant Colonel Jason Dempsey, who is a two-time veteran of the Afghanistan war. And when we went into this war in 2001, George Bush, and this is what the article says, every nation has a choice to make, President George W. Bush said on the day that bombs began falling on October 7, 2001. In private, U.S. diplomats were even more explicit. For you and us, history starts today, then Deputy Secretary of State Richard J. Armitage told his Pakistani counterparts. Earlier this month, as the Taliban raced across Afghanistan, retired Lieutenant Colonel Jason Dempsey, a two-time veteran of the war, stumbled across Armitage's words. To Dempsey, the sentiment was the most American thing I've ever heard and emblematic of the hubris and ignorance that he and so many others brought to the losing war. And this is what he says. We assumed the rest of the world saw us as we saw ourselves, he said, and we believed that we could shape the world in our image using our guns and our money. Both assumptions ignored Afghan culture, politics, and history. And both, he said, were tragically wrong. It was actually just 2 years after the Afghan war started. It was in 2003 when we were starting another war in response to 9/11, which was the war in Iraq. And I remember that morning clear as day because I was actually very distraught. And what was bothering me as I saw the shock and awe of us bombing the crap out of Baghdad and I wasn't even that politically inclined prior to that. I wasn't protesting the war. I wasn't, doing a lot of activism at that point. But as I saw and watched the news and saw us go into Iraq, guns blazing, shock and awe, I was deeply grieved and just kept thinking to myself, we never learn as a country. We never learn. We just keep making the same mistakes over and over and over and over again, and we never learn. And I think what Lieutenant Colonel Dempsey said is absolutely correct. We assumed the rest of the world saw us as we saw ourselves, i.e., exceptional. And we believed that we could shape the world in our image using our guns and our money. Both assumptions ignored Afghan culture, politics, and history. Both, he said, were tragically wrong. Whether it's the boarding schools, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Afghanistan, Syria, you name it, Vietnam, North Korea, our nation, not only did it have this manifest destiny that was based on the myth of American exceptionalism, which is rooted in the lie of white supremacy, which said that Western Europeans were God's chosen people and had the God-given right to ethnically cleanse Turtle Island and claim it as their own. But we believe we have the right to do that around the globe. We believe that we can go in. And yes, I'm not denying that the Taliban and even some of these other regimes that we were going and trying to replace were evil. They were. But we forget, because we don't have a common memory, we don't know our own history, that the United States of America is also evil. We've just never been held accountable. We've never been disarmed. We've never had a regime change. We've never been humiliated in front of the global community. We still honor our ethnic cleansing, genocidal leaders like Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Jackson. We still hold up our genocidal heroes. Other nations were forced to take theirs down because they lost their wars, which is what we're starting to do with our Confederate generals. But we're not doing it with our Union generals, who are just as bad and just as evil. And this is the problem. We think that we can go in and replace one bad situation with our colonialism and exploitation and dehumanizing worldview and think, well, this will catch on quick. And then, even if you watch what President Biden, the way he withdrew from Afghanistan, and I actually commented on this a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, when we pulled out of the largest Air Force base there. We didn't hand the base over. We didn't give the keys to the Afghan government and military and say, here's the base, secure it. We took what we could. We junked the rest. We left vehicles and trash there, not even the keys for the vehicles. And then we didn't even tell the Afghan government and people that we were leaving. We freaking went to the airport, abandoned the base, turned out the lights, and then a few hours later it comes, oh, by the way, we've left the base. Meanwhile, people were looting it and running it over. Right? We didn't leave Afghanistan treating the government that we had helped establish there as a legitimate government. We left it like a bully who had his ass kicked and was humiliated and got tired of the fight and just walked away. So it's no surprise what happened this weekend. It's not a surprise at all. Now, President Biden has said at 3:45 this afternoon he's going to hold a press conference or a national address to talk about Afghanistan. And I tweeted this just a few minutes ago, or maybe half an hour ago. And I'll share this again on my comment section. But I said, I hope, let me bring this up again, sorry. I hope POTUS's national address on Afghanistan includes a joint appearance by George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden together apologizing to the Afghan people for our 20 years of cultural arrogance, abysmal leadership, and failed policies in their country. Right? Less than a few weeks after we started pulling out of this country, it is exactly back to right where it was when we went in. It's shameful. I just put that into the Twitter feed, what we've done. Now, of course, I highly, highly doubt President Biden is going to apologize. I would actually say there's as much chance of President Biden apologizing as there is of Donald Trump showing us his taxes. He won't do it. He won't do it. They're not that different, you know. Because most of the media is left-leaning, they love to scream about, right, even if we look at this, about Donald Trump's America First policies, which he was just blatant about it. But if you are reading articles about what's going on globally with the COVID-19 vaccine, right, which is, we have absolutely an America First vaccination policy. And us, Israel, the UK, France, Germany, our NATO allies, we are treating this global pandemic. And this is how I envision it. We're treating it like we live in a massive skyscraper that's on fire. It's burning. And so we are sitting in our little condo, penthouse. We have fire hoses, fire extinguishers, fire retardant, thinking if we can save our apartment, we're somehow going to save the whole building. And this is exactly how Joe Biden's been operating. We don't have a global plan. It's an American First plan. And now there's reports of us and our nations, other Western European nations, taking the vaccinations that were meant for some of the poorer countries and using them ourselves. Meanwhile, we also have tens of thousands of our own vaccinations spoiling because we can't pay our people to take them. The hubris of our nation, as was exemplified this past weekend, with honoring the Navajo code talkers without acknowledging the injustice of the boarding schools, with promising charity to Haiti without acknowledging our role in creating the system that caused the problem that exacerbated we didn't cause the earthquake, but we exacerbated their inability to respond to it. That literally pulled our people out of a nation that we spent 20 years destabilizing. The hubris of our country is astounding. And it deeply pains me. Again, it was 18 years ago when I saw that hubris on display as we began our shock and awe bombing campaign in Baghdad, which is one of the first things that began even getting me thinking about joining the political discourse. So anyway, I'm not meaning to depress anybody, but we have to deal with this, right? We need to create a common memory. We need to deal with our own history. We need to acknowledge who we are. And 9 times out of 10, Americans are not the good guys. And 9 times out of 10, the evil that we bring into a nation is just as bad as the evil that's already there. Our evil is just a little bit more systemic. And so it's harder to place blame. But it's just as destructive, just as exploitative, just as dehumanizing. We just administer it in a way that lets us attempt to tell people we're the good guys. So I just wanted to point some of these things out today. And I want us to acknowledge that until we deal with our own crap, until we create a common memory, until we deal with the injustice of the doctrine of discovery, until we can acknowledge who we are and how we got to the place where we currently stand, we are going to continue to do this. Administration after administration after administration after administration. We are not going to change. You can elect a different Democrat, you can elect a different Republican, it doesn't matter. The two-party system is there to maintain the status quo, and they're not going to change. We have to deal with our foundations. We have to create a common memory. We need a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. We have to acknowledge who we are and how we got where we are today. And until we do that, we can scream all we want. Joe Biden and Donald Trump are so much more alike than they are different. They're both white landowning men from the 1%. One's a bit more polite, one's a bit more implicit in his views. The other is much more explicit. But their underlying values are largely the same. And they're both having devastating consequences across the globe. Because they're both rooted, based on the myth of American exceptionalism, which is rooted in the lie of white supremacy, which is still how we prop up our land titles. Anyway, my relatives, I will watch with interest President Biden's address this afternoon. I will probably have a few more things to say about it tomorrow. We need to change. Joe Biden's not going to be the one to change our nation, just like the Republicans are not going to be the ones to change our nation. The two-party system is incapable of bringing our nation the change that it needs, the change the globe needs. We have to address it from a different vantage point. We have to do things differently. Thank you for joining me for my second cup of coffee. It got a bit more serious than I anticipated it was going to be. The longer I talked about this, the more I realized just how deep our challenges are that we're facing. I still think we can get through it. I still think we can create a common memory and address things, but we have to stop doing things as the status quo, and we need to start doing things radically differently. I shout out my relatives. I hope you have a good day. Walk in beauty, and may we learn how to walk in beauty together. Shout out and hook on it.